guys, welcome back to Ask Me in My House. I'm Lena.
And I'm Jordan.
We are continuing talking about Nephilim, and so today we are going to be talking about post-flood Nephilim. If you guys have been following along, in the last episode we really dived into what the world would have looked like pre-flood, and now this is more so post-flood. But the question that comes up a lot is, well, okay, so you're saying that there were giants on earth. Well, then why are giants mentioned on later in the Bible? For example, David and Goliath. This happens later on. Book of Samuel, is that when it shows up?
Yeah, but even prior to that, in Numbers, we see the children of Israel encounter them in the land, right?
Yes,
and what
exactly.
does it say? Why don't you read it? Set us up here. Numbers 13:33.
Hold on.
I can only remember that because there's a lot of threes in there. But
Numbers what?
Numbers 13:33. That's, of course, the other question now is, okay, well, if the flood took care of this problem of the Nephilim, then how do they come back, right? Because we see them in Numbers 13 in the land when the children of Israel, right?
Yep, so they're wandering, and then Numbers 13:33, and there they saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who came from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. Wait, so Jordan in the last episode talked about how Nephilim would have been 400.
The first generation Nephilim.
Would have been what, 450 feet?
Yeah, approximately.
So to say that we ourselves seem like grasshoppers compared to them, like if you think about.
Yeah, and of course, you'd have more critical scholars would say, well, no, that's just a figure of speech. That's just poetry. That's just poetic language.
There is nothing about poetry in any of this right now. We're not reading the book of Psalms.
Well, like we've talked about in previous episodes, when the plain sense makes sense, seek no other sense. That's a scriptural principle of interpretation when it comes to studying the Bible. And there's, like Melina said, nothing that would give us any indication to take this as poetic analogy or metaphor.
No, they're just straight talking.
He's saying we are as grasshoppers or like grasshoppers. The analogy is to the grasshopper, not to the size, right? Like that's describing. He's not saying we are grasshoppers, right? But he's saying we are like them. So I probably don't have to explain that, but I know that there might be people out there reading this and coming across this for the first time saying, "Oh, that can't possibly be talking about them." But what we do know,
he's not talking about how grasshoppers hop. He's not saying that we're over here hopping around. Like he's talking about the size of the grasshopper.
Right. That's what I meant. Yeah, he's in relation to size, not saying we are grasshoppers. He's saying we are appearing like that.
Grasshoppers.
So you look at that and you're like, okay, what's going on here? We have Nephilim showing up again after the flood. How do we explain this? I thought God took care of them in the flood, right? So where do they show up? And so there's basically two main theories that scholars and theologians have debated on what happened for the Nephilim to come back. So the first one is called the multiple incursion of angels theory. And this basically states that the watchers that we found in Genesis 6 that came down and procreated with the human woman and had the Nephilim as their offspring, that those ones were judge-bound and buried in the abyss. And then you had more fallen angels come down and do the same thing after the flood. And that's what gave way to these. There's a couple issues with that theory, and I don't personally hold to that. I like to use the word leaning towards or tending towards because I can't say definitively one or the other. We're making inferences on both sides. I would say I don't tend to lean that way for a couple reasons. One, the Bible doesn't ever mention more angels coming back and doing that again. It just says that happened in Genesis 6 before the flood. And two, the book of Enoch lays out, I believe it's in Enoch chapter 9 or chapter 10, it lays out the judgment that the watchers were placed under and the punishment. And it says that Michael the archangel was like trembling in fear, looking at how severe their punishment was that God put upon them by throwing him into the abyss and all this. And he says, nobody's ever going to do what they did ever again. So he's basically prophesying, saying that their punishment is so severe, you'd have to be completely out of your mind to do that again. And so, again, yes, that's Enoch. That's not canon. So I grant you that, okay, do that what you will. Take it for what it's worth. But then the third reason is we see them, even in Numbers 13, all being linked back to a family tree of descendants. So all of the post-flood Nephilim, we can actually link back to the two sons of Noah, Japheth and Ham. We don't see any Nephilim in Shem's line, which is a good thing because who comes from Shem? Jesus, right? So,
And like we said, the only reason we're talking about this is because everything solidifies Jesus.
yes.
Everything solidifies and points and shows God's sovereign hand in the way that he has worked through the lineage and through Jesus coming through the perfect line, genetically perfect line.
Yes. And I submit to you. So if you don't believe that more angels came back and did this again, then where does that leave us? Well, I believe, and there's other proponents of this who believe the same thing, but I tend to lean towards the wives of Japheth and Ham could have potentially been part Nephilim or have had dormant Nephilim genetics, if you will, inside of them that they passed on to their children. And that might sound kind of crazy on its face, but let's read actually in Genesis 9, and I think with that kind of brewing in the back of your mind, this story might start to make a little bit more sense. So if you go to Genesis 9, this is right after the flood. We see that they come out and they step back onto the new earth. The old earth that was is gone, and now the new earth is here, and God basically reinstates the covenant that he made to Adam with Noah again, and he says, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth, and that now he's giving the food and the plants for food, and also the beasts of the field just don't eat flesh with the life that's in the blood, right? And so now you get to this story of Noah planting a vineyard.
I love this story.
And it says, let's go to it real quick. I'm just going to, why don't you read it for us, honey? Genesis 9, let's start at verse 20. I'm sorry, 18. Start at 18.
Okay. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan.
Pause. Why does it mention Ham's son Canaan?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So it's mentioning Ham, Shem, and Japheth, Noah's three sons, but then why does it mention one of Noah's grandsons, specifically Canaan, the grandson of Ham, or the son of Ham, the grandson of Noah? Keep that in mind. Let's keep reading.
Those three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Noah began to be a man of soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and laid uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan.
There's that second mention now. Who is this person? It's Canaan's father. So Canaan's important. He keeps coming up here.
Y'all, it's about to get juicy.
For some reason. We're not exactly sure, but let's keep reading.
And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both their shoulders, and walked backwards and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backwards, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah woke up from the wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, "Cursed be Canaan. The servants of servants shall he too be his brothers."
Okay, so yeah, let's pause there. So, okay, we see Canaan mentioned 3 times here. First in verse 18, again in verse 22, and then again in verse 25. And so a lot of scholars have debated this back and forth, and they're like, what's going on here? What's this with Noah getting drunk and laying uncovered in his tent, and something happens with Ham and his nakedness, but then Canaan gets cursed, right? It's like, what's Canaan got to do with all this? Why is he taking the blame for something his father did, right? Because it says when Noah woke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, that's Ham, his youngest son. Then he goes, "Cursed be Canaan." Why is he cursing Canaan, right? And again, there's some plausible conjecture, like, well, if you're a parent, you could, and someone was intending to hurt your child, you would, as a loving parent, say, "No, I'll take the hurt for, like, if your kids, let's just say if your kid got sick How many of us as loving parents wouldn't say, oh, if I could just take that sickness from my child and I be sick and my child be well, I would do that, right?
Yeah.
Like that's obviously, so if you curse your son's son but that doesn't really make sense. Like it would be more of a punishment for Ham than if it were Ham himself cursed in a way. But then it's also like, well, doesn't Noah love his grandson just as he loves his son? Like that doesn't really hold up when it's really scrutinized.
You're having to put in too many pieces, what it says here.
Yeah. And so here's kind of what I think happened. And again, Rob Skiba's been a big source for me on this too. He said, so I'm kind of adapting what he said, and I'm kind of putting my 2 cents and my spin on it, because I don't agree 100% with what he says here, but I'm like 90%, 99% I do. And so here's what I think is going on. So you have Noah laying uncovered in his tent, and then you see Ham seeing the nakedness of his father, and then told his 2 brothers outside.
What does saw the nakedness mean?
Well, if you go to Leviticus, I believe it's chapter 21.
If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sins. They shall die childless. Let me read it again. If a man lies with his uncle's wife, he has uncovered his uncle's nakedness. They shall bear their sins. They shall die childless.
I feel like there was another reference to it. There's a couple places where it talks about, okay, it's Leviticus 18. Sorry, not 21. It's 18. And it says this.
18 what?
7 and 8. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father. That is the nakedness of your mother. She is your mother. You are not to uncover her nakedness. Verse 8, you shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife. It is your father's nakedness. So just as you read about the uncle,
yes,
your aunt and uncle, when it talks about your uncle's wife is your uncle's nakedness, that's your aunt. Yes. And when it talks about the father's nakedness, that's his wife, that's your mother. The wife of your father is your mother, right?
So according to this,
that's your offspring, or that you came from, right?
So according to this passage right here in Leviticus 18:7, it's saying back over here in Genesis, when he uncovered the nakedness of Noah, that was his mother.
Yeah, so it's what's implied
Noah's
here.
Noah's wife.
Without getting too into it, what's implied here is that Ham had some sort of sexual relation with his mother. And if you're like, whoa, time out, pump the brakes, that's a little too spicy for scripture. Like, this is just an account of what happened, right? And I'm not saying definitively 100% this is, doctrine, but it seems to, with doing a little bit of, back and forth cross-referencing and making some educated guesses, it seems like that's a very plausible interpretation of what's going on here. Now you got to ask the question, why, right? Like, why would Ham do this? And so I think the key here is why, and that's why Canaan is mentioned 3 times here in this story. And I think Canaan is really the key to understanding this. And so if what we know, applying the context of, there are Nephilim that survived the flood, if we're going to go with that theory versus more angels came down later, then you have to ask the question, well, where did those Nephilim come from? Where did the seed or the offspring of that come from? And I'm submitting to you that I think there was something with with Ham's wife that maybe she didn't appear as a Nephilim woman at the time, but when Canaan was born, he might have been born on the ark, or he might have been born shortly after, but he was at least alive because Noah knew his name, right? So he had to have been alive in order to curse him, because he was alive and named, and Noah says, "Cursed be Canaan."
I wonder what Canaan means. Do you know off the top of your head?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know Ham means like dark. And actually, this is a good point to make an aside or a caveat. So a lot of people have very wrongfully misinterpreted this whole idea of Noah cursing Ham and to be a servant, to likening that with the Afro slave trade and the whole like Ham being the father of the African people, and that Ham means dark, and that's what and that I think is a complete cop out and very lazy theological argument. I think it's not talking. I don't think I'm as confident as I can be that it's not talking about anything to do with his skin tone or his, how melanated he is. I think this is actually talking about something that he did that was sinful. So it has nothing to do with, racism or his skin. And if that makes sense, it's actually talking about something genetic that was going on here with his son. And so what I think happened, what I'll submit to you, is Canaan was born, and I think there was something to identifying him as Nephilim. And when Ham saw this and saw his son born, like a lot of them were known to have 6 fingers, like a 6th digit on their hands. And that's why the Native Americans, when they were terrified of the 6-fingered men, because they were always terrorizing their people and their villages. And you could see these stories all throughout different ancient civilizations and people groups. That's why they would raise their hand up and show that they have 5 fingers whenever they would greet somebody, to say, look, I'm not a Nephilim. So all that to say, there could have been something, again, this is speculation, this is reading between the lines, this is trying to fit the story together. There could have been something when Canaan was born that maybe he had a 6th finger, maybe he had like an elongated skull, because we know that's another marker of these ancient like fossils and skeletons that they'll find that resemble the Nephilim people. So maybe there was something that happened, and when Ham saw his son Canaan born, he was like, there's something wrong with he could have said, God, I need a new wife because there's something wrong with this one. And now there's, this problem that we just got off of the ark as a result of, you destroying everything. Now it's somehow this, is back in some way, shape, or form. And I think that could have been proven with Canaan's physical appearance or something about him.
Interesting
identified him as a Nephilim.
That Canaan is in the same line as Nimrod. And if you guys watch our Tower of Babel video, we talk about how the Tower of Babel was started by Nimrod, and he was a very evil man. Yeah,
and what's interesting about that, I actually had that in my notes later on, is to get to, Nimrod is a descendant of Canaan, and his name means we will rebel. And it says that he began to become a giant.
Yeah, because it says
he
was
a mighty hunter.
Yeah, a mighty hunter, a mighty man.
And a lot of scholars will say that it's not just hunting like you go out hunting deer or pheasants or whatever, but actually hunting of men's souls, a hunter of men. And so that's a whole nother can of worms that we don't really have time for. But let it suffice to say this, that if there was something, because we know Noah and his wife and his 3 sons were pure, and I believe Shem's wife was also pure, because we don't see any Nephilim in her line. But then when we get to Japheth and Ham, we see Nephilim in some of those lines as well. And so then and I know that opens up a whole other can of worms. Like, are there still people descended from them that have Nephilim seed in them today? Right. And these are all questions I'm still trying to work through. Like Malay and I are like, I don't really know. We're trying to figure out what we understand it to be. And if so, are these people redeemable or not? Like, what's the state of their spirit, right? Or their soul? Are they like beyond salvation? Are they not, human? Are they like, what's going on here? And so I think there is some semblance of a genetic key element going on here in Noah's story, because Rob Skiba points out that Ham might have looked at his wife and realized, oh no, I know I'm pure, but apparently she isn't, because there's something off about Canaan. And then that's when he goes over and sees his father laying drunk in his tent, and he's like, well, I'm not going to go fight my 2 brothers and try to take their wife, but hey, look, my dad's drunk and my mom's laying over there. I know she's pure. And he could have had the same logic going on in his mind as Lot's daughters, when their mom turns into a pillar of salt as she desires to go back, right? She looks back. It wasn't like they're running and all of a sudden she goes, and then she turned into a pillar of salt. She actually had this
desire to go back.
Right, like she wasn't committed to following the Lord and trusting His plan. She was doubting that and wanting to go back to the false gods, and that's where God said, "All right, you're sealed in your judgment." So then Lot's daughters basically say,
and these are all stories that gives everyone the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah.
If you're first reading the Bible, if you're like a non-believer and you read the book of Genesis, you're like,
"Yeah, I mean, it's
what
wild."
is this?
But it's just an account of history as it is, without apologizing for it. So you have Lot's daughters who, I mean, they just left this fire and brimstone hailing down, and it's like, okay, we're the last ones left. Like, there's no one left. It's just us and our dad. So they say, well, let's just get him drunk and have
Go
relations
in and lie
with
him so that we preserve offsprings from our father.
Yeah.
So they made him drink wine that night.
And as like uncomfortable as that incestual relationship is, like they thought that was like that they were the last people left on earth. And so you're like, okay, maybe Ham is having the same reasoning and rationale going through his mind. Like, I need to preserve the line somehow, and my wife is corrupted or tainted, so I'm going to go to my mom and lie with her. So then when Noah wakes up and he realizes this, he curses Canaan because maybe he sees the same thing in Canaan, like, okay, he's got a sixth finger, or there's something identifying him as a Nephilim, and that's why he's cursing him and saying, we just left the world that was that was destroyed as a result of this, and now I'm seeing it back again. So of course scholars are like, well, no, this doesn't hold any water, this theory, because why would God send a flood to destroy it only for it to still preserve? And the same exact, and my response to that is the same exact question can be raised of those who believe that there were multiple incursions of angels, because it's like, okay, God judges and binds these angels, and then it's, what is it, like he clears off the playing field, and then, okay, it's halftime and now they're coming back doing it again. Like, why judge and bury these ones and not these ones, supposedly? You know what I mean? Like, what's at the end of the day, you arrive at the same conclusion that the Nephilim appear on the earth again. It's just a matter of how do they get there, right? So there's all these, speculations, but then we do see giants coming from the line, and they get increasingly smaller, right? Like in the last episode, we talked about 450 feet tall or 300 meters tall.
And they think Goliath was 12 or 15 feet tall.
Yeah, they say Og of Bashan was somewhere between 15 and 18 feet tall, and Goliath was like 9 to 12 feet tall.
Oh, so he's barely a giant.
Right. I mean, he's a puny giant. I think it's Amos 2:8 talks about
he's an extra large grasshopper.
They were the size of the cedars of Lebanon too, like some of the Nephilim were. And the cedars of Lebanon were between like 35 feet tall and 150 feet tall. I mean, huge, right? Inconceivably huge, but also compared to that first generation, if that's true, like they're like miniature, like babies, So there's like this diminishing value that they slowly get smaller and smaller as time goes on, and that could just be that the potency of this technology or the genetic modification is starting to wane and to dwindle. But regardless, that's what we see, and there's even more modern stories of Nephilim, like the giant of Kandahar. Go research that. There was a special forces ODA that supposedly, I think it was in 2003 or 2004 in Afghanistan, encountered this 12 to 15 foot gray, like pale gray humanoid being that had like red hair. And if you just go read the supposed, like, okay, maybe someone's making this up, sure, but it seems like the details and the way they describe like his skin being super dense and the smell that came from him was like otherworldly, all these things that you kind of put two and two together. It's like, okay, this either makes for some really good sci-fi literature, or this stuff is still happening and it's just getting covered up and not talked about, because again, it affirms the Bible, it affirms Jesus's mission, it affirms and tells us that everything that we've been taught here in Scripture is true. And so, I wonder why the forces of evil that are at work in the world today would want to hide that and discredit all that, right?
Mic drop.
Honey, I want to leave you with the last word. I did too much talking.
No.
I didn't even get to my story of Jubilees, but I guess I could turn it really really quick, but I'll summarize it. So you have Shem's son Arphaxad, I think his name is called, in Jubilees 8, and it's just a couple verses where you don't see this in the canon, obviously, but it's found in the book of Jubilees, and it says this: he took himself a wife, and she bare him a son, and so on and so forth. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize for himself a city. And he found a writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he read what was thereon, and he transcribed it, and sinning, owning to it. For it contained the teaching of the watchers, in accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and moon and stars and all the signs of heaven. And he wrote it down and said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. And it's like, could this have been the same issue with Canaan? Could there have been more to it than that? I don't know. But we look at what's happening in our world today, where we have transhumanism, and people seeking to merge with machines and seeking immortality, right? And trying to become like gods. It's all the same lie, right? We don't need Jesus. We don't need God's way of salvation. We're going to become gods our own way. We're going to drop our consciousness and our mind and our spirit and our soul into a machine and live forever, and just update the parts and provide, programming modifications as we go. And we'll live forever. We won't need your God or to come God's way through salvation, right? In Jesus. And so I think that is happening today. How close we are to that, or how successful that been, is yet to be seen. But we know that, again, the days of Noah are likened to Jesus' return. So
if anything, we should all be getting excited because he's coming back.
Yeah, but it's crazy times we live in. So
sure the heck is.
All right, we'll end it here. Hopefully that was helpful. And let us know in the comments below what you guys think of this. If there's other theories, if we need to take off our tinfoil hats for a little bit.
Well, actually, look up and see where else it talks about the nakedness of so-and-so, because it's mentioned several other places in Scripture. Because the idea of like having sex with someone, like the Bible doesn't literally say like they had sex. It'll say they uncovered the nakedness or they knew each other. There's different language for that. So be aware of that and see where else you can find it, because it's everywhere. All right. Peace. Love you guys. Bye.